Our next presenter is Brent Sturton. Where do I begin? We've been friends so long, it's difficult to know where to start. But why don't we start with, it's possibly every photographer's dream to win a World Press Photo Award. Brent has won 13 and counting. And he has won 10 awards from Pictures of the Year International. And he was named Wildlife Photojournalist of the Year for 3 years running by the Natural History Museum in the UK. And he is a National Geographic Fellow. And he has recently been made an environmental ambassador for the European Union. Brent has created some of the most iconic and unforgettable images illustrating animal welfare, including the once seen, never forgotten image of a murdered silverback gorilla being carried out of the jungle by heartbroken rangers. He spends about 300 days a year on the road, but not even COVID has managed to slow him down. He's committed to issues relating to wildlife, conservation, global health, diminishing cultures, sustainability, and the environment. He once described his passion for photography as a kind of madness, an obsession that drives him every day. His remarkable skills and talent are equaled only by his modesty. Please welcome Brent Sturton.
Thanks, Aidan. It's like I want to look around the room and see who you're talking about, you know, but thank you very much. Guys, thanks for coming today, and thank you very much to Simon and Dahlia for always making this a pleasure to come to, okay? I'm going to talk about a very specific story today. You know, a lot of my stories are, they're on the negative side in terms of its crisis, in terms of the environment. This is a success story. And I wanted to, you know, when Simon said to me, what do you want to do this year? What would you like to bring to Sharjah? I said that, I did an essay for National Geographic, a small essay on falconry and the influence of the Arab world on the resurgence of falconry. I wanted to do that for two reasons. One, because it's a conservation success story and we have very few of those. But more because, guys, you know, the natural world and the environment and sustainability is the perfect bridge between Islam and the West. You know, it's this common value system that after the last 30 years, we might begin to understand each other a little better through this medium. So I thought that falconry would be a good way to go. You know, the thing with falconry is, guys, before this discovery of oil in this region, you know, the Bedouins, the protein sources were very limited in the desert. So, you know, thousands of years ago, guys looked into the desert and they saw these birds catching desert hares, small antelope, etc., and they realized that if they could build a relationship with these birds, they would be able to obtain protein, etc., and that relationship has endured. So when you look at this culture and how quickly it's accelerated, I mean, there's nothing like it in the world, really. I mean, there really isn't. And the way that the Arab world looks back at their heritage is through falcons. So I went, on this story, I went to Mongolia, I went to Scotland, and I worked in the UAE, and I worked briefly in America. It's not finished for me, but let's start in Mongolia. These are Seika falcons, guys. 5,000 left in the world. The major migratory routes on the steppes of Mongolia, etc. This is high up on a cliff top. The thing with Mongolia, though, is the steppe, and there are really few nesting sites, really few. So they're vulnerable to predators, etc. So Abu Dhabi has installed 5,000 of these artificial nesting sites. And that's allowing the success of these birds to continue. And they have this relationship with the Mongolian Wildlife Authority. So I went out with this gentleman for a week, and he monitors the birds, the weight, etc., etc. But this is a new thing. This never existed. You know, it's within the last 8 years. And he works with the local guys, the nomads, the farmers. Really symbiotic relationship, but it's really brought back these falcons. But the biggest problem, guys, you know, I'll talk to you about that in a moment, but this gentleman was really quite incredible because what he's done is he's gone into this falcon's nest and retrieved one of the 4 chicks, and the foot is deformed. So he's taken off the plastic, and now that chick will be able to hunt properly. But otherwise, the chick's doomed. But in order to do that, within 3 days, he's created a relationship with this wild bird. You know, so I always think that our ability to communicate with animals is almost completely unexplored. You know, what we know about them and the potential for relationships between us and them. For me, this is an example of that. So 3 days ago, this guy used, it's a food-based relationship. He basically seduced this mother away from her chicks, etc., made sure she had a food supply for her chicks, then rescued that baby and fixed the foot. So again, just an example of what's possible. What's happening here? But guys, the biggest problem for raptors and so many bird species in the world is electrocution. So you're losing so many, every year it's millions and millions of birds. And it's because, the perch situation on these things, on these electric poles is, there's nowhere for these birds to go. They use them as lookout sites for prey, but there's a $1.50 modification that you can put in place on every pole, which saves these birds. And when you think that we're in this era of, the sixth age of extinction, I just think it's nothing for every power company to put a $1.50 adaptation on every pole so we can save these birds. They're a vital part of the food chain. So I was with this guy when he was collecting the dead falcons and really just marking them and seeing this. But this next picture, guys, that's 8 months. That's 300 Saker falcons out of a total population of 5,000. Doesn't have to happen. These birds are really revered in the Arabian world for falconry. They're really highly prized and it's special. So whenever I see a scene like this, it's particularly heartbreaking. So I'm going to Scotland. Now, the reason I'm in Scotland, guys, is because captive bred falconry that happens out of the Arabian world, most of the birds are out of Siberia, they're out of the Arctic regions, etc. So it's important to work with a certain temperature. This is Howard Waller's breeding facility in Scotland, in Inverness. Howard's an interesting guy, a former Rhodesian Special Forces soldier, etc. Long-time wildlife guy, but he has a relationship with Sheikh Buti Maktoum bin Juma, who is the uncle of the Crown Prince of Dubai. And Howard, he's one of the top 3 breeders in the world. So what you're actually seeing here is a male gyrfalcon. Howard's wearing an insemination hat. So that falcon, through growing up with Howard, has gone from seeing him as a mother to seeing him as a potential mate. So that falcon hops on top of Howard's hat, ejaculates into that, and then Howard inseminates the birds like this and creates a very particular line. Now, guys, the thing with falcons is, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, wild capture is a huge issue. But a great deal of the Arabian world has now moved to captive-bred hybrid birds because they're better. They are super birds. So these colors that you see are all about lineage. So these birds are very carefully monitored, special breeding patterns. So this is what these falcon farms really look like, and very intimate relationships. So Howard will rear these things from the egg. And then what he'll do is he will take those chicks and put them with a bird that's not the mother. Those are rubber eggs that you're seeing there. So Howard will substitute those rubber eggs. Falcon's defending its eggs. Put the chicks in. And amazingly enough, there's just this completely natural mothering instinct that takes over. So that's part of the breeding process for this. And when the falcons get large enough, get old enough, Howard takes them onto the moors in Scotland into something called the hack. And this is where the birds learn to rewild themselves. So they go out there with these satellite tags into these spaces, and they're out there for 6 to 8 weeks by themselves. And in that process, they reacquire the talents that are so valued in the Arabian world. So this is Sheikh Buti. Now, Sheikh Buti, guys, this is the former Minister of Defense for Dubai, billionaire businessman, powerful man, connected man. But during the season, guys, for 4.5 months of every year, he gets up at 3 o'clock in the morning every day, goes into the desert and flies and trains his falcons. And it's heritage. He sees a value system in these birds that he's passed on to his son. This is Rashid and Maktoum. You know, guys, this is a closed world. Yeah, it's not. This was not an easy one to photograph. So, in terms of trying to work out how to get inside it, I was lucky enough to find a family. And the thing that I want to emphasize is that this is a bonding exercise that occurs between father and son, and it's been this way for centuries. So, I wanted to illustrate that and just the process that these guys go through. Because, man, these guys could be water skiing behind yachts in Monaco every day of the year. They don't have any worries. They're powerful people, business people, etc. But this is how so many of these elite businessmen choose to spend their time. So I find that fascinating. So, you know, again, what I said about Islam and conservation, if these guys are prepared to devote this kind of time and thinking to falconry, what's possible with the rest of conservation? You know, it's, anyway, it's always something that's fascinating for me. You know, and the resources, guys, are just astonishing. You know, I mean, you know, this is just one of Sheikh Buri's outdoor aviaries, only used very early in the morning and later at night. But guys, there are much bigger ones than this across the UAE. And again, just this absolute fascination, this, you know, this total devotion to these birds. Really incredible. So the first thing that happens, you know, so the guys go out into the desert. There's prayer. And there's always this very beautiful thing that happens with the father being greeted by the son. It's very formal. You know, it's, I don't know about you guys, but in the West, I don't see so much of this. You know, so I like that. And laying out the birds, special vehicles, etc. You know, just the amount of resources that you see allocated is really, I never saw anything like that before. You know, and I work on all sorts of species. Yeah. So again, the birds get laid out on the stones, and then begins this conversation, and it's just this banter about, okay, which bird is going to be the best today, and which bird is at what stage, etc. And you're looking at obsession, you know. So really fascinating for me to see it, you know. But just this never-ending, you know. And what's also really interesting for me is it's very democratic. So here's a guy who's one of the most powerful men in the UAE. You know, having these conversations with his handlers, and it's equal. So again, through the knowledge and the respect that Sheikh Buri has for his handlers, all that hierarchy disappears. You know? And these are all captive bred birds, guys. So hybrids, you know, especially they're designed birds, essentially. Satellite tracking, etc., etc. Every bird that goes out has these tags on them. Yeah, I must be honest, really not easy to photograph these guys because the birds are flying at close to 300 miles an hour, or 300 kilometers an hour, I should say. And they don't like the noise of motor drive. So I'm not a sports guy, so it was a bit of a challenge. But I love the silhouettes of this. I always feel that the way these guys dress, they have such dignity, you know? And the birds are ferocious. It's incredible because the prey species are almost invariably larger than them. But you can understand why so many of these falconers identify with the birds and the qualities of the bird. So the birds, when they go out initially, they hit the prey species or whatever they're hunting, and then they are very quickly removed from that because these guys don't want the bird to get hurt. They don't want the bird to be wounded or damaged in any way. So they usually take away the prey species and they substitute that with quail. You know? It's just fascinating to think that these are birds that, you know, these are birds that came out of Siberia in this case. And here they are in the UAE, and they'll be flying in Kazakhstan, Pakistan, you know, that's where they go. I mean, this is a mini runway that's in the middle of the desert, and it's only for remote control aircraft. And what that's designed for is fitness exercises for falcons. Yeah. I don't know about you guys, but I never knew anything about this, you know, so for me it was fascinating. Also the choices of what prey species they'll use and how that ties into tradition, etc. I mean, this is a device where they carry a mallard duck up to a certain height and drop the duck, and, you know, if the duck makes it, he makes it. And I mean, I saw a couple of occasions where the duck got away, but the falcons are pretty talented. And you've got these guys who are building very progressive designs for, again, this is the treadmill for falcons, essentially. So Peter Berg makes something called the Berg Wing. You know, he's out here testing with his son, but it's these advanced, you know, aeronautics, I guess, but it's designed to fly in the same way as the Falcon. So just very interesting for me to see this. I had no idea this existed. I really like the traditional stuff. So the tawa, the traditional lures were really beautiful. So, you're going out very early in the morning with this kind of stuff. And, what's interesting is that behind me is one of the most sophisticated, if not the most sophisticated skyline in the world. But here I'm looking back 5,000 years. And I love that, This is a timeless thing. And the fact that they choose to honor it and keep it, it's fantastic that it means something to them. But I am really interested, if you care that much about falcons, what else could you care about? And if the wind's blowing, etc., no matter what the weather, they like it when the wind's really blowing hard because they say that it toughens up the falcons, etc. And it's almost as if, like dogs start looking like their owners, or owners start looking like their dogs. I started seeing, I might be projecting that, but the fierceness of the falcons is often reflected in the faces of the owners. Come on in. So guys, the number one prey species, the bird that all Arab falconers want to hunt is the Hubara bustard. Hubara bustard is almost 3 times larger than the falcons that hunt them. And it's a very smart bird. The feathers are designed so that if the falcon latches onto it, those feathers come out. So they are the escape artists of the bird world. So this is the first time on this day that Sheikh Budi was flying his new gyrfalcon that he's been training for 4 months against sort of the ultimate opposition in the falconing world. So they released the Hubara and the falcon, everyone runs off, etc. And there's the gyrfalcon takes the Hubara, and the first thing that the sheikh does when he gets to the site is say a prayer of thanks. So again, it's very serious for these guys, and quite moving to see that, really, But he couldn't be more thrilled. And again, here's a guy who has access to anything you could want in the world, but this is what motivates him. They have these hunting camps, guys. I mean, the hunting camps are challenging, guys, because this is the boys' club section of the Arabian world. It's they don't necessarily want me there with a camera, etc. But I was able to do some of it. So this is actually a hunting camp that was newly established in Abu Dhabi in the desert. Again, first successes with new falcons, and the guys couldn't be more thrilled. But quite surreal sights, when you think about it, etc. And honestly, when the Hubara takes off from the desert and this thing shoots off after it, as a photographer, you're like, okay, how are you going to photograph this? Because it can go anywhere, and it's going anywhere at 200 kilometers an hour, So I'm not a sports guy, but I was lucky on the one occasion this happened close to me. But this will give you an idea of the size difference. And some of the values that the Arabian world accords to these falcons relates to this. It's a David-Goliath system, etc. So the Hubara is trying his luck, has second thoughts, and realizes this isn't going to work out. And the success rate is pretty intense. But again, I spent quite a bit of time with this family, and on some occasions it was the only time I saw them smiling, but it really meant a lot to them. And again, you come back to this tradition in the evening, so whereas, you went to that library yesterday, which has become, that's normal in this part of the world. But this is back in the desert, and it's, again, back to heritage. Yeah, the plains, guys, I mean, yeah, I have to be honest, the plains was, so I was able to get on a hunt. And then the Crown Prince of Dubai came on the hunt, and it meant that I had to get off the hunt. So I was on this plane, about to take off for Kazakhstan, taking some pictures, getting very psyched about the whole idea when the word came down that I would now need to get off the plane. But yeah, I never got to make the picture that I really wanted to. But once again, levels of care for these birds, and just worlds that I hadn't really seen. And in terms of breeding centers, guys, I mean, this is the Sheikh Khalifa breeding center in Abu Dhabi. So guys, the thing with the Hubara busters is they're endangered birds, okay? So in 1996, what started happening with the Arab World is they had a lot of negative press about that. So they established breeding centers. Now they have these breeding centers in Kazakhstan, in Morocco, and in Abu Dhabi, and they're producing 50,000, 45,000 birds every year, which they release into the migratory routes. So, you know, it's controversial, but I see these guys doing more than most. I mean, this is a semen collection facility for premium male Hubaras, which goes into the system of breeding. This is egg selection, etc. Again, just really a total refinement of the kind of birds that they want to produce so that essentially they can keep hunting without depleting the natural resource. Yeah. So after a while, they'll put these guys in outside enclosures, and they'll start measuring wing size and making sure that these guys can handle the migrations that they're about to undertake. So you find these birds, you know, in, like I say, Kazakhstan, Pakistan, etc., but they've been bred in Abu Dhabi, for example. Yeah, so quite a tremendous resource to put into this, really, you know. Again, a lot of money behind it. And the thing is, you know, as falconry has, you know, it's very much a sport of the elites. It's also become very popular amongst a lot of you know, let's say the less wealthy Emiratis. So this is common, the falcon souks, the stuff that you'll see around, the iconography, etc. You know, and this is sort of, you know, the level of care that you'll find in the souks, etc. You know, there's a women's falconry league in the Emirates as well, etc. This is the junior champion, and here she is getting interviewed by local television. So it's definitely, you know, it's become a more democratic sport across the region. You know? And the level of care, guys, I mean, you know, you know, we shoot a lot of hospitals for refugee work, for all sorts of stuff, and when you go in these falcon hospitals, you know, you can only wish that there was this level of care for most humans on the planet, you know. I mean, quite surreal. I mean, these x-rays, these are, you know, if you buy a falcon, it has to undergo a mandatory health check for disease, etc. So these are x-rays checking the lungs, for example. You know? German doctors. Yeah. So I don't know, have you guys seen this stuff before? Because I hadn't seen it, you know. I just thought, wow. You know, and again, it's really exciting for me because I photograph the decimation of the wildlife world. You know, I photograph all the illegal trade stuff, and it's nasty. So coming here and doing a piece like this, it's a relief for me, you know. So I really, you know, I could have chosen to show anything at Sharjah this year, but I thought I'd show this because I wanted to pay some credit to the Arab world on this one. I really feel that, you know, when it comes to falcons and the Arabian sector, it's not all been positive, but since the advent of hybrid birds and of captive breeding, it's gone a long way in the right direction. You know, and there's sort of almost the cult of falconry in this region as well, and the use of these birds in tourism is completely ubiquitous. So in this situation, these birds would fly from one hot air balloon to another, etc. You know. This is Esme from South Africa, explaining to Chinese visitors the principles of falconry, etc. But again, you know, I hadn't seen this. So interesting. And also interesting that you can form a relationship, because Esme, I mean, she loves this bird and the bird loves her back. I didn't know you could do this with a falcon. So yeah, lung tests, and again, all this stuff is mandatory. If you keep falcons in any kind of business capacity, this kind of stuff has to happen on a regular basis. Come on, man. You know, as you know, guys, the birds and there's a bird problem with most hotels for crows. So in Dubai, they use the falcons to keep the crows away, etc. Sometimes, you know, it's amazing because you put a falcon up and immediately there's 10 crows. Yeah. Americans have their own take on this. I had a brief look at it in America. never really got into it there. But I'm trying to work on some of the American Air Force at the moment that I would like to use to complete this essay. I think that the military and falconry is interesting. This is working with inner city kids in Washington, D.C. You know, guys, the thing with falcons is that, you know, it's an iconic bird. So you find them in film sets, you find them in, you know, in fashion shoots. I mean, this was a particular fashion shoot for Elle magazine. So they flew in this Wrangler from Seattle. And then on this last image, you know, birds as therapy is an interesting concept. I did Prisoners with Dogs. I did a few things connected to therapy and animals, etc. But this is Fred Hamilton James. And when Fred was 14, he was told that he had a fatal brain tumor. Okay. And at that point, he'd been begging his parents to let him get into falconry since the age of 8. And when when he was lying in hospital, he turned around and said to his parents, "Listen, can I get the falcon now?" And on the way home, there was a red-tailed hawk stuck in the fence that he rescued, and this is that bird. It's not a falcon, but Fred has ambitions to become a professional falconer one day. So at this point with this, guys, I mean, I'm working on a few other things that are more urgent at this time, but I want to go to Pakistan. I couldn't get a visa when I was shooting this story. We couldn't get a visa in time. I'm not sure why. And I want to work with the military on these. But that's where I'm at the moment. So anyway, like I say, you know, if the Arab world can do this with falcons, I think that there's no question they could be very valuable assets for conservation everywhere else. They did great work with the desert oryx. You know, there's a number of UAE schemes across Africa in conservation. Nice to do a positive story for a change. Thanks very much, guys.
It was the extraordinary Brent Stetton, and we wish him well for this year's World Press. That would make it around 14 awards, so good luck for Brent. So our next presentation will be by Giles Dooley, and that's going to be